Good afternoon. I'm Maya Tripp. I'm the Jewish Life and Culture Director at the APJCC in Los Gatos and Jewish Silicon Valley. I'm excited to tell you briefly about Jubilee, our annual day of Jewish learning that this session is a part of. Jubilee wasn't easy to plan this year. There were more question marks than ever before. There were more changes, hesitations, and getting back to the drawing board and starting all over again. And this is exactly what all of our JCCs have been dealing with for nearly 2 years. And in spite of these challenges, we have continued to bring our communities together through meaningful experiences delivered with lots of creativity. This year for Jubilee, we built a program where Martin Luther King meets Tu B'Shvat, where people are encouraged to meet safely, to hike and paint and learn, volunteer, exchange clothes and ideas and experiences. I'm holding the bag that we gave away this year, and if you didn't get it by any chance, let me know. It was such an amazing 2 days of Jubilee. I'm inviting you to join us tomorrow for the last day of Jubilee and for many other events, programs, and classes in the future. Keep well and safe and stay in touch. We all need a community these days. I'm honored to present Dana Geitzer Gottlieb, Jubilee Chair.
Shalom. Thank you, Maya, and the JCC of Silicon Valley for everything you do to build and strengthen the connection within our community. My name is Dana Geitzer Gottlieb. In the past several years, I've been dedicated to work for and with our communities, and I've recently started my pluralistic rabbinical studies. This week's Torah portion, Parashat Bashelach, that we read next to Tu B'Shvat, tells the story of Exodus, Yetziat Mitzrayim, a story of people transitioning from slavery to freedom and from being fragmented tribes to becoming a nation and a community. This is also the story of many different communities around the world, fighting for freedom and equality. Looking at this weekend's events, we can all take a deep sigh of relief and rejoice in having all the hostages from the Bet Israel congregation in Colville, Texas, set free. Toda Lael veBaruch Metir Asurim. The story of freedom and emancipation needs to be told and retold in every possible way. Miriam, Moses' sister, did it through the song and dance, and by doing so, carried the entire nation in taking an active part in celebrating their salvation. Our communal rituals are the building blocks of what brings us together as a community. The leaders and institutions they represent on this panel are at the forefront of creating those local rituals and connecting us together. I am honored to welcome Anat Balint and the community leaders to hear more about their mission to further build and strengthen our communities and bring us closer together. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana, for these words, and thank you, Maya, for your opening words. Good afternoon. My name is Anat Balint. I'm the Jewish Studies Coordinator at San Jose State University and, of course, a member of the Jewish community and the Israeli community. I'm honored to be here today in this conversation with 4 leaders of the Jewish community centers in the Bay Area. This is part of the Jubilee events of Jewish Silicon Valley. It is great to see you all here, even if we're online once again, what was not our hope. We are still together and we can still listen and talk and ask questions and debate all these things that are at the core of being Jewish. 2 days ago, when I made some notes towards this event, I planned starting this conversation with thoughts about moments of uncertainty, maybe fear, and leadership in times of crisis. But then yesterday, uncertainty and crisis broke through our window once again. The Jewish community members of Beth Israel in Texas were held hostage for almost 12 hours by terrorists. This horrible event ended, thank God, with their safe release. But the shock, the trauma, the fear, they're still here. They're still with them. They're still with anyone who considers himself part of the community. The waves circle much further than that specific location. An attack on a synagogue is an attack on Jews as a group. It's a signal. It goes beyond one community and touches each and every one of us to some extent. So I would like to kind of change my plan a little bit, and I'll introduce the members of our panel, and maybe we'll start with some comments on yesterday events and where does it find each one of us. So first, let me introduce our speakers for today. Lael Gray, hi Lael, is the CEO of Jewish Silicon Valley that hosts the Jubilee events. Zack Bodner is the president of the CEO and the CEO, of the Oshman family JCC in Palo Alto. He's also the author of the new book, Why Do Jewish, that I read with great interest, that offers a toolkit for Jewish American leadership in the 21st century. This would also be a great opportunity to talk about your new book, Zack. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Scott Brockman is the executive director of Sonoma County JCC. Currently a JCC without wall, a very interesting concept, and we can touch on that as well. Melissa Chapman, hi Melissa, is the CEO of the Jewish Community Center of the East Bay. And I'm really happy we could bring all of you together today. So I want to start with you, Lael. If you can briefly relate to the events yesterday, and then we'll move to others.
Well, you know, I'm sorry I'm going first because I was really looking forward to hearing how others responded. But, you know, because we are not just the JCC, but also now serving in our community to support the entire community as Jewish Silicon Valley. Honestly, yesterday we were watching the events unfold and really trying to make sure that any response that we had was based in fact. And I think, you know, part of the challenge as a leader in the Jewish community is knowing that we need to present a calm, assured response in a time of crisis. And it's important, and I felt yesterday that it was really important for us to not jump to any conclusions about what was happening until we really were certain what the situation was. And it was very hard to discern what was really happening just with the little bit of information that was coming out.
Right, so finding the truth is not an obvious thing, right? That's kind of the first challenge. I think it's such a good point for these times. Zack, can we go to you?
Yeah, sure. Hi. First of all, I'm sorry we're not there in person. I was really looking forward to having Jubilee together in person. Because Lael and Maya, you said we're not going to do it in person, I took the opportunity to come up to Tahoe. So I was actually on the ski slopes yesterday when I got word that there was this hostage situation in Texas. And it obviously distracted me from the rest of my day. I was completely consumed by it. You couldn't find any news about it on the mainstream press. The only place you could find things in the beginning were on Twitter. And amongst us as colleagues, we were texting each other and just trying to find out, as Lael said, you know, what's the truth, what's really happening. And it was just tragic. It was something that as Anat, as you said in your introduction, you know, one attack against one Jew is an attack against all of us. And I just felt like it was cutting me right to the core. And like you recognized that there was this feeling of relief at the end of the day when the hostages were saved. There's still so many questions. There's still so much about the incident that we don't know. So right now, it's just a moment to be able to say, thank you. You know, thank God that they came out safely, but we have a lot more work to do at this point.
Yeah, Scott, do you want to say something briefly?
Yeah, like Zack, I was with family yesterday. I was in Sausalito, and I was going to take my son for his first wine tasting, and the day just got you know, just was so distracting because of all my colleagues are from around the country, and everybody was on Twitter and even before we turned on the radio, and it was just a reminder that, you know, these things, we talk about Jewish institutions and they talk about that it happened in a synagogue, but it happened to people, right? It happened to one of us. It happened to people. It's happening in a building, but it's happening people, and you feel it in your soul. And yesterday was it was horrific. And I also got phone calls that was just echoed because we had an incident that happened here in Sonoma County earlier on the previous week that I was still getting phone calls from too. So, my heart goes out to everybody. People talk about rabbis being on the front lines, but it's all of us. It's everyone. It's a Jewish community professional is on the front lines. It's us as JCC executive directors and CEOs, but also everybody in our buildings or everybody in our offices too. Though, it's really now, sadly, it's brave sometimes to come to work.
Yeah. Melissa, would you like to comment?
Well, I think we have to continue to break through the horrific exhaustion and frustration and devastation we keep facing, because as community leaders, we have to make sure that we find some way to protect our communities, our micro communities, and to make sure that they understand there is a support system and a network in place for them as well. I like Zack was probably most saddened by the fact that there wasn't mainstream media coverage, and the little bit you saw didn't really mention the Jewish community in particular, or stayed away from words like anti-Semitism. I think, as we all know, that is a very, very real and rapidly growing phenomenon that has been with us throughout history and has become very prominent again.
Right. I mean, I think what's interesting that although it seems right now there are signs that maybe he was like a lone actor, right? And he was working alone and maybe was even somewhat insane. Well, nobody knows for sure. Still, going into a synagogue and taking people hostage is a symbol, right? He did it because that's very, very symbolic in so many ways and touches upon so many nerves, right? We can just be relieved that it all ended, in the best way possible. I would like to take you back to March 2020. This is almost 2 years ago. And I want to take you back to these days that turned weeks and then turned months of sudden shutdown, of confusion about what to do, even, masks, no masks, panic purchasing, Zoom entering our lives. And of course, the horrific reports on death and suffering all around us, the concerns about our loved ones. And I was thinking, trying to go back to this month, and we've all been there, each one in his own position. And the word that came to my mind was the one of loneliness. It was this loneliness that was imposed on many of us who lost their day-to-day circles. But it's also the loneliness of leaders, because each one of you was pretty much, even not in practice, right? Alone in that position of not knowing what to do when something like this happens. Coping with a sudden change that may threaten the existence of your organizations and your communities. And maybe if each one of you can try and go back and share one or two of these moments of, I feel okay to say despair, loneliness, difficulty, unknowing. Melissa, would you like to start maybe, or anyone else?
Sure. All of the words you used, yes. And they've continued. I think it's been a roller coaster. There are moments where maybe we see a brief moment of light, and we'll share some of those moments of light later, but then it comes racing back. Once we thought we have a temporary solution or a new path, there we go. We're derailed again, and the path has been completely closed. Although,
What was your biggest problem?
I think that continued uncertainty, and I will say thank God for the Bay Area colleagues and Scott. I'm so glad you now have this incredible resource. We were really there for each other because as you would say, the wind is really most strong at the top of the mountain, right? But you're the one who has to keep it together for everybody else. And I can't speak for my colleagues, but I still haven't fully processed or allowed myself to fully absorb what's been happening for the past 2 years, because I don't see us being able to stop anytime soon.
Scott, can you, thank you, Melissa, so much. Can you try and touch on one such moment? And, so we're talking about experience we all went through, right? Pandemic is something that there's no one person on earth that wasn't touched by it in some way. But from your specific perspective, can you go back to any
I wasn't here as a JCC executive director, but I was the executive director in a Jewish space in Miami at a synagogue. And I can tell you that, there's a reason in our tradition that we have a minyan, and that we're supposed to gather as a community. It's to feel connected. And I think it's been really hard as much as we rationalize being connected on these screens, on Zoom, it's just not a substitute for being in person. And I like Melissa, feel this kind of I'm still unsettled. It's so unsettling. It is like a roller coaster. It's like you're up, you're down, you see the light through the tunnel, and then there's another tunnel. And I'm going to speak for myself, but it's exhausting. And I think that a lot of people are exasperated, are just exhausted and really just want it to, they want it to end. And there's really a pent up frustration I feel now that maybe I didn't feel a few or 4 months ago, because we have had glimmers of hope and then we've taken a step back. Right.
Zack, you're leading an institution that was also, well, I think for all of them, was hit financially, right, by this. Was that the most difficult thing of kind of thinking, oh my God, we're, we may not be able to recover or something else? Can you try and touch on a specific moment or one issue?
Yeah, we were hit financially very hard. It was interesting because we have a colleague who's not on this call who's been a part of this also since the beginning, Paul Gaduldig, who now runs the San Francisco JCC, but at the time was running the Foster City JCC. And I remember December of 2019, he's like, hey guys, do you think we should be paying attention to this thing that was going on? This, flu that's coming out of Wuhan, right? And we're like, Paul, stop, you're being crazy, right? Meanwhile, 2 months later, and I remember exactly on the day, it was Friday the 13th in March that we just closed down. Right? We had built a COVID team.
I remember it.
By February already, because we were starting to see exposure problems. Lael and I were talking about when she had her first exposure, and we had our first exposure. It was like, okay, these things are starting to happen. And then boom, overnight, we had to close down. But I never felt lonely. All the words you used to describe the situation, Anat and Melissa, you spoke so beautifully about. Loneliness was not one of them, because I felt like I always had folks around. I always had this team. We have a great team of JCC execs from around the country. We have a great COVID team at our JCC and my senior team. We were there every single day meeting to make decisions together. My board of directors was there to help along the way. So there were a lot of people to help. But what was difficult was making the tough calls, right? Like that, to your point, the financial decisions. Within weeks, we knew that we were going to have to do layoffs or furloughs. And that was heartbreaking. It was just crushing to know that, the staff that we had cultivated and built up and recruited and mentored and taken our time to just invest in, they'd become family. We were going to have to potentially say goodbye to half of them. And that was the most heartbreaking part of that.
That was their moment that you thought, we're not going to recover. Maybe the pandemic will pass, but we're not going to recover from this.
I never thought that. I wasn't going to let it happen, right? We are unique in that we have a $36 million debt on our building. So I had some massive financial challenges. But I knew we were going to do whatever it was going to take to get through it. Even if we had to go down to bare bones, even if we had to mothball the facility and close it for a while, I knew that could not happen, and we could not allow this incredible place. All of us are running incredible places. We couldn't allow it to not come back.
Lael, I mean, you were also kind of relatively new on the job, dealing with immense challenges, right? Because there were two bodies that merged. I mean, you can talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Can you go back to, I dare saying, your darkest moment in this roller coaster?
Yeah, like my colleagues, I don't think that I have ever really lapsed into despair through this whole thing, which I think is partly my personality, but also partly because there's such a strong network of support that we have. And so every decision that was made and every challenge that I had to face, I did not face it alone. And like Zack just said so beautifully, I also I still don't feel, as much as there are people who are around that are concerned, I still don't feel like we're not going to recover, even though, we're still going through this. I have the advantage of having run a JCC that doesn't have a fitness center. And so there were many times when I said, boy, it's a good thing that I was in a JCC that didn't have a fitness center, because I know how to do that.
Right.
Right. So I've always felt that we will find our way and we will continue to serve the needs of the community. And quite honestly, while at that time in March, we were actively working on putting the merger together and we did have to put it on hold, the reality of the merger actually gave me so much hope and so much to look forward to, and so many new opportunities have opened up because of the merger of the JCC and the Federation here. And so, we have been so focused on the vision and the new mission and thinking about how we serve the community that's actually, I think, given us a real a rudder in this storm. But, unlike saying this was like a roller coaster ride, to me, what this feels like, having lived through Hurricane Andrew a long time ago, this feels to me like a very, very slow moving hurricane. Like, in a hurricane, you batten down, you put up the shutters, you sit in the dark and you wait and you wait and you wait until it passes. And then there's the eye of the storm gets sunny for a minute, and then you're back in the dark, and the other side of the storm tends to be worse, So having lived through a couple of hurricanes, and that one in particular, that's how this feels, only it's really slow. And I feel like we're still in that mode. We're still waiting to see what the damage is going to be. And I think that a lot of that damage is really emotional, psychological. And I think that we are all going through also a very slow moving trauma, and we're not through it. And I think that when we do find ourselves crawling out the other side of this, which is pretty much what I think is going to happen, then I think we're going to have to start to deal with the trauma. And just, the saddest thing for me, as Zack said, has really been the people who have been impacted, our staff, our members, people who, members are coming back slowly. We're still at about less than half of our normal membership, and the people who are here are sad. They just keep saying, I just wish it could be the way it was. We've really lost a lot. I was looking at pictures on our Facebook page recently of the JCC, like what it looked like in 2019, and it's unrecognizable today because there were just vast numbers of people that were here gathering, laughing, smiling, just children and everybody mixing together. And I mean, it was just like, we have lost so much right now. And we all hope that it will come back in some form. But I think that that's really what we're going to have to deal with.
Lael, I love the image of slow moving hurricane, because we were hoping today basically to sit together and look back, right, at what we've been through and maybe processing the trauma, but we're still in it. So with your permission, I will use this slow moving hurricane. It kind of really echoes to me, and within that, being adaptive turn out to be a very valuable skill. And I don't want to talk about JCCs. Let's talk about, any other businesses. We see it all around us. Some collapsed very quickly. You're not businesses, right? But some collapsed very quickly. Others found ways to thrive. Think of restaurants, right? The sentence turning, lemons to lemonade, which is a kind of a cliche, but we've watched it happen again and again. Those who are very quick to say, okay, we're going to do deliveries. We're going to reinvent ourselves. What do people want? Comfort food or anything else, we're just going to do it, right? We're going to respond. And I want to ask you about your own discoveries of finding in that slow moving hurricane. I love it. In which we're still in, right? We're still there. We're talking about a situation that is still happening. Where did you find your points of adapting to the situation in ways you didn't think before, of actually making new achievements or finding joy in different ways? Lael, maybe you'll
share.
start. Yeah. Zack, you want to start? Please.
But I'll start by saying I'll giving Lael a shout out. I mean, early on, Lael was one of the, I think, on the very cutting edge of saying, guys, we're gonna have to go virtual. And she's recognized we're gonna have to invest some money in professionalizing our video production efforts, the Zoom stuff. And I was like, Lael, please, no. I do not want, like I was more like Scott. I was like, I want in person, I want hugs, don't make me do this. But she was right, and she recognized that we were going to have to make the investment, and so we did. All of us started to pivot and do things online and do the virtual, and not just the meetings like this on Zoom, but investing in production equipment so that we could put big things online, like our big Zionism 3.0 Z3 event. But I'll tell you what happened that was really interesting. Anat, we have one of these programs that we do, which is kind of a deep Jewish study program. It all went online, of course, and we have this young man who grew up in an Orthodox home in New York, and he came out as gay, and that was tough for him in the community. So he moved out here. This was several years ago. He moved out to the West Coast, where he found a much more welcoming community. He fell in love with a Hindu partner, and then he kind of said, "Look, I want to go back to my Jewish roots, and I want to find a community that would embrace me, and I could do some more deep Jewish learning." And he didn't quite find a home here in the Orthodox community. He didn't quite find a home in the Reform community. So he found a home with us at our JCC, and he started engaging with our Jewish studies program. And ultimately what he did is, because we had to go online, he called his mom back in New York. And they had, the relationship had really strained and almost completely broken over the years. And he said, "Look, Mom, I want you to participate in this Jewish learning thing. I want you to Zoom in." And because it was through Zoom, it was kind of a natural mechitza, a natural separation. So she felt comfortable enough Zooming in to participate in these Jewish learning classes. And of course, over time, they have rekindled their relationship. She found out how invested he is in his Jewish heritage, in Jewish learning. And she has felt that it was a safe enough space that their relationship has been rejuvenated, all because of the ability to do this on Zoom. So there are these silver linings that you could find sometimes if you look hard enough.
Oh, that's such a moving story about, kind of finding new ways to connect that we couldn't do before, right? Scott, do you want to go and talk about?
Yeah, I'm just going to reflect once again on just my past experience, just being at a synagogue, but shivas were transformed. Like when we talk about getting together, I mean, when I was an executive director, and after our third or fourth shiva at the synagogue, we just got such wonderful positive feedback, because people who couldn't make it to a funeral when we were in person could now participate and sit there, and congregants and the community could gather. And it was like, that was a real silver lining. So, I sounded very negative and dour before, but there's been so many silver linings. There hasn't just been one eye of the hurricane. There's been many eyes of the hurricane. There's been so many sweet spots and so many things. And I think you almost have to be like, almost write them down. And I've been writing
Can you
down
mention one?
The Shiva thing's a moment, but just to remember these things, because when we go back in-person thing, there are really wonderful things that all of us have done, at either a JCC or rabbis and synagogues and other Jewish institutions that have done, that we should kind of maintain, because they are, adding to the feeling of connectedness and community. And so I don't think we should go to the other side of all of this and just never look back. I think we need to really glean the great things that all of us have done creatively with our teams and our staff and our community and our leadership, because there have been amazing things that have happened.
Right. Melissa, do you want to talk about some amazing things that have happened to you in your community?
Yeah, it really forced us to figure out how we can connect community when the brick and mortar isn't there. And our JCC does not have fitness. And so what we did, you'll see Diane Fisher from JCRC JSV just said, phone calls. We started calling all of the older adults weekly, and then realized we needed a deeper connection outside of our staff. So we started a pen pal program between preschool families, after school families, and older adults in the community. And I wish that I had some of those letters with me now to share, but really, I think these were the times that we were able to come in and shine and do what we do best, which was to make sure that no one in our community ever felt that they were alone and didn't have that network around them, even though they may not be walking through institutional doors.
Right. That's wonderful. Lael, any you looking back, like in that slow-moving hurricane?
As everybody has said,
tall?
I mean, there have been so many positives that have come out of it, but I want to specifically talk about Jubilee and then also transition. And I know we have slides of photos that I do want to bring those back up so we can talk about those. But before we show the pictures that I wanted to share, Jubilee last year was an example of when we had to rethink what we had always done. So our Jubilee celebration in the past had been this, on-site big event, lots of food, all kinds of stuff happening in person and people moving from classroom to classroom. And last year, at this time, we were already pretty good at the Zoom thing. And then we had to re-envision how we were going to do Jubilee in a virtual space. Like, what was that going to look like? And how were people going to choose? And the team was so creative and really took the opportunity to figure out what was going to really matter to our community as a theme at that moment in time last year. And so the focus was on social justice issues last year. And it represented kind of a bit of a turn for this JCC. It was pre-merger, we weren't JSV yet. And so I think, the staff was willing to take a risk and really go out on a limb and worked with partners. It wasn't just us. We worked with partners throughout the community and other organizations, and it was really meaningful. And what we learned from that activity was that our community feels so strongly about getting involved Jewishly in social justice issues. And so we committed to making sure that that was going to be really amplified as part of our work. And then with the merger happening, the other opportunity there was then
if you can say a word about the merger, because you're saying the merger, but I'm not sure if everyone knows about it. So just say merger between these two bodies.
Okay, so Jewish Federation of Silicon Valley and the Addison Penzak JCC merged in February. They've been talking about doing that for quite a long time. And ultimately, almost a year ago in February, we completed that merger. Which allowed us to develop our new mission statement, which has really been the focus of all of our work. And the mission is harnessing the power of community to improve lives, build bridges of understanding, and strengthen the Jewish people here in Israel and around the world. So we talk about our mission in everything that we do now. And as part of that merger, we also now have the JCRC of Silicon Valley, Jewish Community Relations Council of Silicon Valley, as part of what we do. So everything kind of, all came together at the same time, at the right time, for us to also then start to really look into the work of JCRC and how that was helping to end anti-Semitism in our community, which also through all of this has been a theme that we've all been dealing with. And then also how that gives our community opportunities to engage in social justice work, how we're looking at that through a Jewish lens. All of these things combined at a very opportune moment when people, I think, were seeking ways to make a difference in the world and feel like we can have a positive impact. So, also in the midst of this, we were the victims of acts of hate. And we had swastika painted on our campus in September on Yom Kippur. And also came to find out shortly afterwards that there were swastikas painted around Los Gatos. And, you know, as we talked about how to respond to that situation, and Diane Fisher, as you see, is on this call also, you know, we talked a lot about what would be the appropriate response. And we really felt that what we needed to focus on was the relationships that we have in the community and the fact that we do have so many people who stand with us. We have worked long and hard in building community and building bridges of understanding. And so we wanted to make that the focus of our response. So Diane managed to start with conversation. Actually, the town of Los Gatos reached out to us, actually, just the mayor reached out to us to see how they could help in that moment. And if you want to show Gabe, if you want to pull up the slides.
If you can put on the slides.
So what we did was we responded by putting together a walk, which was United Against Hate. And this is an effort that actually happens around the country. And it's, I believe it's United Against Hate Week. And so we we wound up with 40 different partner agencies that joined us in this walk. And it was a profound moment of solidarity. And what was so moving to me personally, and I think to others in the Jewish community about this event, was that anti-Semitism was centered as part of the conversation about hate. It wasn't just, you know, I think that all of us have experienced that a lot of times when people are talking about acts of hate or people are talking about, you know, bias in our society, that anti-Semitism is sort of off in its own category, and we're often not at the table in these conversations. And this event really brought that to the surface. And Gabe, if you want to go to the next slide, you can see here, this is the former mayor. She just recently was replaced by a new mayor, but she's still in city council. This is at the United Against Hate walk. You know, she herself literally spoke about, you know, swastikas cause pain, right, as part of the conversation. And it was just an amazing achievement, I think, for our community to have pulled this walk together, to be at the center of the conversation about fighting hate together, you know, all forms of hate, but anti-Semitism was really there and talked about. So this was one of those things where it was just, you know, out of talk about lemons making lemonade. I mean, it was beyond that. I mean, it was something where I believe that the momentum that was created out of that one opportunity is going to carry forward into the future for a very long time.
Amazing. I want to take our conversation a step forward beyond the pandemic. And well, talking about still the pandemic, Zack, you really turned this crisis into an opportunity because you sat down and wrote a book. This book, oh God, I have virtual background. Okay, it doesn't come across very well. Do you have your book? Here it is, called, and I like the title, Why Do Jewish? And I liked, it's a very easy reading, very coherent, and presents your ideas in a way that is accessible. And you dived into the questions that are at the heart of American Jewish communities here. And for me as an Israeli, of course, it was very interesting. Some of it very familiar, some of it new. The core issues, the challenges of being a Jew in the United States and beyond. And then you presented your vision for steps forward. And I want us to take the conversation to this, right? We're not just dealing with the pandemic. I mean, Jews have enough problems without a pandemic, thank God. and let's talk about, you know, the problems of the Jews. And you touched on the problems of Jewish communities. I would say from my perspective, mainly North America, mainly in the Bay Area. It's a very American text from my Israeli point of view. Very interesting in that sense. And what do you think needs to be done? And before we go to what needs to be done and to the solutions and to, you know, the bright future, I want to ask you not to summarize your book, not at all. They have to read it, just read the book. But really, if you can point at one point, I will give you two, but one point I would prefer of tension or rift within Jewish communities, like what's the most sensitive area or the no-go area for Jewish communities nowadays that nobody wants to touch or talk about because it may tear us apart and kind of make us understand that maybe there is no such thing as Jewish community, but maybe, you know, we don't have anything in common, maybe.
It's a great question, Anat, and thank you for bringing up the book. It became a labor of love during COVID when I wasn't sleeping and I was just up in the middle of the night and I couldn't go back to doing more emails for work and I had to put my creative energies towards something. And I've been working on it for a couple of years, but I got serious about it during this time. And frankly, it actually was a lesson I learned in the process of doing that was that, you know, my days started to turn into each other, right? When you work from home, my wife and I had this ongoing joke, are we working from home or living at work? And I had to really start to think about, right? We could all fall into that. When you're just bored or you have nothing to do, you pop open your laptop. And I talked to my friend Tiffany Schlein, who wrote this great book, 24/6. And I had to figure out how to do Shabbat in my life. And I'm not Orthodox. I don't do Shomer Shabbos kind of no lights or whatever, but I had to started to do tech-free, screen-free. I had to differentiate Shabbat from the rest of the week.
Kodesh, right? Kind of
right.
The day-to-day
Exactly.
and the Shabbat, yeah.
Exactly. And as I was doing that, I did start to try to analyze some of the trends that were happening in our community, some of the problems. The answer to your question, I don't spend a lot of time on it in the book, but I do feel like one of the greatest challenges facing the Jewish community today is polarization, right? For us to still be able to utilize the word community, like all of us, Jewish community centers, Jewish Community Relations Council, like community is our middle name, quite literally. For us to be able to maintain ourselves as a community, we have to be able to embrace the Elu ve'elu, hold in our hands at the same time that we're Republicans and Democrats, that we're Orthodox and secular, that we're Israelis and Americans, that we're Ashkenazi and Sephardi and Mizrahi and Korean and Indian and African American. Like that is the greatest challenge facing us today, our ability to hold on to these at the same time. And the beauty of Jewish community centers is that we do not have a litmus test. You can be any and all of the above or nothing, and you are still welcomed within our doors, and not.
Right.
But
so actually my question, I'm going to make your life harder because actually my question was, so polarization, of course, right? You know, I come from a very polarized society. I come from Israel. And I thought, oh, I'm going to come to, you know, America and the Jews are like, you know, I didn't think that I would look into Jewish communities and find them nonetheless polarized. But my question was, so polarization, of course, but like, over what? Is it Republican and Democrats, or is it how Jewish you are, or is it, can you choose one of them?
It's all of the above. It's all of the above, right? At the end of the day, look, so if I had to kind of zoom out and do the meta analysis of this, I think the overriding challenge is, if we're going to tie all those pieces together, is the inability to define coherently an answer to the question of why. The title of the book for me is Why Do Jewish?
Right.
And I pivoted from Why Be because I feel like Why Be is the old formulation. In fact, when I was writing this, I researched and there's 4 books with the title Why Be Jewish, no books with the title Why Do Jewish. But in this day and age, it's about the tachlis. It's about the doing. You know this word tachlis? I know you do or not, but for those on the call who don't, tachlis, it's a great Yiddish word that means like getting down to business, getting down to brass tacks.
Tachlis, just for background, it's a Yiddish word. It comes from tachlit. Tachlit is a cause, is a mission, right? Is something that you want to do, right? And straight to the point.
Right. So the tachlis is the doing, and in the question in the title of the book, Why Do Jewish, is really about the why. What we have to be able to answer that question for ourselves, and not for our families, for our kids, for our communities. And for me, this question started when I was young. I remember very clearly in high school, one of my buddies who was Jewish came home with a non-Jewish girlfriend, and his father flipped out on him. And I thought, well, I couldn't understand why. It was the ultimate hypocrisy. I mean, this was a kid who, we didn't do a lot of Jewish growing up. We were barely Jewish. This term H2O Jews, high holidays only. We went to synagogue on high holidays, right? Like, okay, so his parents never showed him why being or doing Jewish was important. So when he comes home with a non-Jewish girl, I mean, this was a kid, by the way, who had a ham and cheese sandwich after Yom Kippur services one year. I'm not kidding. Like, and by the way, that's okay. I don't have any judgment on how you, like, I have my own version of kasher. Somehow lobster rolls outside the house become kosher in my family. So it's okay. Like, I don't have any judgment, but like for a kid who's going to be raised that way to come home with a non-Jewish girlfriend and his father flip out on him, I realized, Anat, we have to all be able to answer this question of why. Why is Jewish peoplehood?
I'm gonna stop you here because we're gonna go to the question of either why or kind of how to think about it forward. But I wanna ask others. You didn't write the book about it, but so Zack was talking about polarization, and I want you, if you can relate to your own communities and be brave and touch on, the wounds. Like, where does the polarization go? Maybe Scott, if you want to start, of like, what are the things that you don't dare saying, or you're being very kind of start speaking very slowly and cautiously as a leader of a community?
There's always this tension, I think, in the Jewish community to be unified and to pronounce unity and to be a center for unity. But there's a tension between unity and uniformity, right? We don't have to all be the same. We don't have to have the same opinion. When you're studying Talmud, the blessing is that you have differing and dissenting opinions, and dissenting opinions get codified. And so it's to introduce another Yiddishism or a Hebrew thing. It's like people need to, I think the tension is that sometimes people need to consume themselves, to contract themselves from their politics, from their outside. They can bring that to studying or being Jewish, or as Zack says, doing Jewish, but it can't be at the forefront. It can't be on the headline. It can be in the article, but it can't be the headline. And so I think a lot of people are approaching their Judaism, and I think it's just because it's in the ether nowadays politically, and that's really, really, really hard. And it centers around Israel. I mean, Israel is a lightning rod when it really shouldn't be. And that's a real shame that it's difficult now to talk about Israel in an open space because of all this tension of, if you believe something or you state a certain opinion, that will lead to the destruction of the Jewish people in Israel. It's that apocalyptic sometimes when you're dealing with certain people in the community. And so, it's that I feel that tension all the time, whether it's here in the Bay Area where I'm new, been here since August, and especially like in Florida, where forget about it, Israel and politics is like, it's everywhere. It's in every synagogue about who gets invited to a synagogue or who gets invited even to a JCC, like in Boca Raton where I was living. I mean, it's really, really difficult. And I have to keep on reminding people that, that I learn with, or that I try to, speak in front of, is that we don't have to, unity it doesn't have to be perfect. It's not messianic unity. It just means that we're together. And a moment of unity was yesterday, right? For like one moment or for hours yesterday, everybody was really like touched.
Yeah, but that's the question, is like, in this moment. Are we united only when we're threatened by,
we shouldn't be united in crisis. We should be united, or we should be feeling that connection to each other. We should strive to try to feel connected to each other when it's not a crisis. And that's really a tension too. It's really hard.
Yeah. So Israel is very sensitive. I mean, politics, you mentioned politics, and the politics around Israel, of course, is a very, and again, for me as an Israeli, it's a very interesting landscape to learn and realize, how cautious the discussion around Israel is. Melissa, do you want to say, like, is it the same in your community? Like, where are the no-go areas? Kind of talk about the things that you don't talk.
Well, I would say that Berkeley, California is probably the heart of polarization around Israel and has been since the 60s, maybe since 1948 or so. And we won't spend time dissecting the why of that, but it's been an extremely challenging environment to navigate as someone who comes from a community where it's at the heart of everything we do. I come from Chicago. And I want to go back a little bit to Zack's book and a piece that Andrei Spokojny wrote recently, the head of the Jewish Funders Network, really referring us to a grove of aspen trees, right? Each tree has its own individual beauty and personality and bumps and broken branches. But underneath is this tremendous root system, and it becomes one living organism that when one tree is weak, the rest of the root system comes in and helps strengthen it. And here's where I'll bring Zack's book in. We do a lot of talking about peoplehood, and I think now is the time for all of us, both in the larger community and our micro communities, to start redefining what peoplehood means for our community. I think that's the way that we're going to start reopening the doors to conversation and understanding. And we know well enough that we are Jewish and we are always going to disagree with each other. That's how we come out with the best possible solutions. So I think, and I didn't come back to Israel, but there are ways that we can start to bring the human elements back so that these conversations aren't as frightening. And we can really get back to talking about what it is that brings us all together in that very intricate root system.
Thanks, Melissa. Lael, do you want to, so I just want to say to our very patient audience that we'll, in a few minutes, we're going to open the conversation to questions. So Lael, do you want to talk about, when do you feel like you're walking on eggshells, or like the things that you don't, you would prefer not to touch, but of course are there?
Yeah, so it's really hard for me to add anything of more value to this conversation because my colleagues, I think, have really made such excellent points that I completely agree with. And, in terms of what can't be discussed, I have learned over the many, many years of being in a Jewish leadership role that mostly what's important, it's not to avoid the conversation, but more that it's important to make sure that people feel heard and that people feel like they have a voice in that conversation. And it's very challenging to not alienate people, right? So rather than thinking about this from the perspective of, if I say anything, I'm going to get punished, I've come around to seeing that actually my job is to facilitate other people's ability to express themselves and not feel like they're somehow being alienated from the community. And I think part of my concern is that no matter where people stand or land in their views on whatever variety of topics we can talk about politically, they all feel afraid that they're going to be alienated in some way. And I think that everybody is coming from a place of anxiety about anti-Semitism. So whether you're talking to somebody who's politically left or somebody who's politically on the right or somewhere in the middle, there's this sort of existential threat that everybody feels. And I think it's just very important for all of us to acknowledge that people are coming from a place of fear of persecution and fear of, actual physical danger as we experienced yesterday, right? So I think if we hold all of that together as part of ensuring that people feel like they are welcome to be part of Jewish life, regardless of where they land, that's one of the goals. The other thing is that it's just so inherently Jewish, as everybody else has mentioned, for us to live in a space where there's more than one truth, where there are competing truths. And that, I think, is a gift of the Jewish people to the world, is to be able to grapple with competing truths. So I think that that's part of our
opinions,
job as well.
opinions
opinions, truths, perspectives, and even actual truths. I mean, there can be actual competing truths that seem to contradict each other, but they're both equally true, you know, or multiple truths. So I think that is our job.
I have to add from my experiences I see in the university, you know, within the very tiny Jewish community at the university, how explosive things were between, you know, Jewish faculty just before the election in the US. You know, it threatened to tear this very small group apart. Very sensitive, like saying anything, you know, is just like throwing a bomb. And then when there was a war in Israel, things became so hypersensitive and people very quickly became so aggressive and intolerant and almost panicking about a war. And I was like an Israeli, I kind of thought, this war is not happening here, you know? But the reaction and the emotions were as if, you know, the bombs are landing right here. So that was you know, another lesson for me. And I want to end up, like, just wrap up, you know, before we open to question, and just, Zack, I'm going to ask you, you know, after kind of thinking of, you know, polarization, right? And also you talk a lot about what I think is very relevant, the younger generation. How do you maintain communities, not with this generation or the former, but with the next one and the one after? I'm going to do something cruel and give you 1 minute to talk about,
That's fine.
You know, the way forward. That's, you know, when I did my PhD, they said, you know, you should be able to talk about your PhD in 1 minute and it should be comprehensive. You present a vision. You have some ideas of what to do.
Yeah. Well, first of all, we have to meet them where they are, Anat, right? We have to bring the mountain to Muhammad, as it might be, or to Moses. And for these young people who are not stepping foot in our institutions, we have to find where they are. There's a lot of great startups out there, a lot of really cool organizations, you know, Wilderness Torah, Urban Adamah, Moishe House, At the Well. I could keep going on and on. And so we who run these big institutions like JCCs, like federations, like synagogues, we have to make ourselves platforms for them, Anat. And we have to go out, meet them where they are. We have to speak their language, and we have to make Jewish life meaningful, relevant, and joyful. Those are the things we have to do. And we have to be big enough and broad enough that we can offer a variety of options to plugging them in. It doesn't have to just be traditional Jewish study or traditional Jewish holidays. It could be aspects of Tikkun Olam. It could be aspects of art and culture. It could be aspects of how you do spirituality differently. But if we can find ways to meet them where they are, to answer their needs, and to speak their language, that's how we're going to reach them. Was that under a minute?
Yeah, that was, you know,
okay.
And also with the right energy and yeah, and you also present this idea of a leap year, right, where young people would go after college, you know, wandering between, you know, Jewish communities here and Israel and maybe other communities, which, you know, I loved, and I immediately thought, well, somebody needs to put a lot of money in this in order for it to happen. But you know, I think it's a very good idea. And from my Israeli perspective, I think that teaching the language, teaching Hebrew, you know.
By the way, this leap year is
one of the worst decisions that was ever made was that, you know, Hebrew was not very strongly kind of promoted into Jewish education here. I think it's a core element. But that's
I'll just say, Anat, before you turn it over to my colleagues. Look, this idea, you know, for the first 50 years of Israel's life, it was only about diaspora Jews sending stuff to Israel, right? Political support, financial, and now Israel's strong enough that we can be importing from Israel so many incredible aspects of its culture, of its language, of its food, of its spirituality, but also this idea of the Mechinah program, this leap year, this idea of between high school and college, there's a year that you become a greater person, a stronger adult, you engage in your own journey. That's the leap year, that's the Mechinah year, and we have to mesh diaspora Jews, Israeli Jews, part of this time in the diaspora, part of this time in Israel. We don't have enough time to go into it here. But we can spend a lot more time.
I just thought it's a very good idea. And Mechinah, what you call, or a leap year, or kind of a year in between, right? Some kind of a graduation process, you know, preparing yourself to adult life is something that became very common in Israel. and very meaningful as a personal development phase. And I think it's a great idea to kind of put all these grassroots organizations together and make something. All right, we'll go to questions. So Shanna, oh, hi. Deborah Lipschitz, like Zack, always reinforces the need to celebrate Judaism and Jewishness, especially for young people. Right, so that's a comment. And Shana, I'm so happy that you're with us today. Sorry, I'm just not seeing everyone who's here. Diane Fisher, how do we balance the needed reaction to anti-Semitism with the needed joy of Jewish culture? So that's, I think, a comment, Diane. Anyone who wants, Maya, why don't you start with a question and open your mic? I think you had a question. And anyone who wants to ask a question, just please use the reactions to raise your hand, and I will refer to you. Oh, Dan, that was a question. Okay, I'll go back to it, Dan. Sorry about it. You didn't put a question mark. But Maya, why don't you start?
I wanted to seek for advice, really, as a program director and a program planner. You need to kind of wake up every day with enthusiasm and excitement, and go back to your office, and even if you have lots of hesitations, to engage the community and with a smile. So where do you find inspiration, and where do you find this excitement every day to lead?
Should I say who starts?
Yes.
Who wants to start? Lael?
Well, Maya, you hear from me a lot, so I don't know if I can add to the conversation, but what inspires me to do this every day is just knowing that our Jewish life has so much to offer us as a community, right? Like it's seeing our community come together around our values. It's seeing our opportunities to celebrate who we are, to bring other people into the mix, just that feeling of community, and knowing that I personally feel like I have something to offer, and knowing that through our organization, we have so much to offer the community. And so I might not have any specific answer on any given day about what's today going to hold. Usually I say, the very first thing I say to Jeff in the morning is, what's going to happen today? because we never know. But I am always coming from this place of feeling like I really do feel like I have something to contribute. And I know that Jewish Silicon Valley also really has something to contribute to the world.
There's that famous quote by Oprah Winfrey that says, you remember not how someone, I think she attributes to somebody else, not what someone says to you, but how they make you feel. And I really feel that, like, all of us on the screen here, like, have such joy of just being Jewish and of celebrating whatever Jewish means to each one of us. And that kind of that joy, that infectious joy, is transformative, and it's inspirational to people. And no matter how hard the day is, like a phone call about a statue in Santa Rosa is for inclusion, but it's not including Hebrew, and it's like the person's stressed on the phone, it really turns into this wonderful conversation, or this kind of like interaction with another human being, and talking Jewish, and talking about being Jewish, and why they're concerned, and why they love it, and why they want the Hebrew language on the statue. And so something that should be full of tension sometimes it's also filled with joy. And nothing is more Jewish than that, right? Like, nothing is more Jewish than kind of like, oh my God, there's a horrible situation. But then you find that moment, of joy. I mean, as an Israeli, you know that even the most here from on Independence Day, from going from like pivoting right away with one horn from tragedy and remembrance to like just joy. So I think we do that every day in the work that we do.
JCCs are fortunate in that we really get to provide one of the most open, welcoming, and I think non-scary environment for Jews and non-Jews. And that also gets back to a question Diane was posing, is how do we find moments of Jewish joy when we're dealing with all of this anti-Semitism? Well, our centers have the ability to bring in people outside of the Jewish community who are allies, adjacent, or curious, anything in between. And certainly, you know, and Lael, you've been working on this as well, these social justice elements and finding ways for our community to become civically engaged and involved so we can create those relationships that will continue to not just bring joy inside of our institutions, but when we have something like yesterday, that we do have the friends and support that we need. I agree with Scott. Jewish joy is everything, and we can find it in all of the small and big pockets if we just take a few minutes to explore it.
Zach, do you want to say anything? Or you don't have to. I'm not imposing, but just.
My colleagues have said it beautifully. I just see that Rabbi Lori Matzkin has her hand up.
Yeah, so I want to go. I want to go to you. Can you unmute yourself, Rabbi Lori Matzkin, and ask a question directly? Yeah, I want to hear her voice. I want you to join.
I checked that most people on this call are friends and colleagues. So I thought it would be a great chance to just hear what you think about leadership. So I am a product of East Bay of Walnut Creek JCC. I was in Palo Alto as the Palo Alto JCC got built, and now I'm honored to work at Jewish Silicon Valley as the family educator. And so, you know, as we sort of, to me, the thing that we didn't talk about is sort of religiosity and prayer, spirituality in any specifics. And as, you know, one of the rabbis in the JCC movement, by far not the only one, I'm just curious to hear what our leaders want to say about leadership. What does it mean to sort of be a JCC success story? What does it mean to, you know, have vision for the future within and beyond, you know, the proverbial walls of our JCCs? Where do we see taking the next generation? You know, if there's that PJ Library child that I have inspired 20, 30 years from now, where do we see them leading?
So basically you ask, if I'll try to put it very short, like what would be success for you within the younger generation? Did I get it right?
Yes, in terms of leadership and even potentially rabbinic leadership in our movement and in Judaism 8.0.
Right. Zach, do you want to say anything about it?
Yeah, I think it comes back to inspiration, Lori. I think that, you know, you do that so well, and so many of the Jewish leaders in our community do that so well. If we can help these young kids understand that living a meaningful Jewish life can give so much to your life, right? Like it can give so much purpose, it can give so much connection. And these are the two things that everyone's looking for in life. People are looking for a sense of connection and a sense of meaning, right? We're looking for that sense of belonging. That's why we come together. We find these communities, and we're looking for that sense of why. Why are we here? What's our purpose in life? I happen to think it's about making the world a better place, right? I think that the spiritual element can add so many answers to those questions, but we have to encourage the kids to ask. We have to encourage them to ask. We have to encourage, you know, and it's a very Jewish conversation. So oftentimes we answer their questions with another question. But encourage them to explore, encourage them to go deeper, encourage them to find the things that they care about and bring it back. You know, we have at our preschool at our JCC, we use the Reggio Emilia philosophy, which is very child driven, right? You know, your kids are not going to graduate from our preschool knowing how to read, knowing how to write, knowing how to do math. Like it's very social and emotional learning, and they're the ones driving the conversation. So if they come to school carrying a big old leaf that has fallen off a tree, you get to have the conversation about this time of year and fall and what does it mean, and did God make the leaves fall, and why? Like you just have this way of engaging them that, of course, it's a very Jewish conversation. And who wouldn't want to go deeper on that, no matter how old you are?
Right. Interesting, by the way, I have to say that, you know, Reggio Emilia is something that is thriving in the center of Tel Aviv. And then we came here, you know, with my girls, and we found out that it's also kind of running, well, we're in San Francisco, but it's a very kind of Jewish community related thing or way to look at education. And but you wouldn't find it anywhere in Israel. So maybe it's about, the progressiveness of these communities. And but I'm very thankful for the Jewish education that my two girls were lucky enough to get here. I'm going to go to Miriam Mar's question, and she says, I'm going to read it for you, Miriam, if that's okay. I miss the Jewish community news in Santa Clara County. Now there is no central place to find out about birth, death, events, and classes at synagogues and elsewhere. Also, general news of interest such as flights to Israel, restaurants, food stores, nursery schools, etc. Will it ever come back either on paper or online? So well, Miriam is really asking about, or asking for a portal for that would, put together everything that is happening. So that comes to kind of my area of media and journalism and keeping people informed. So I'm the first one to advocate for this, but I will let you relate to it.
So I think that's really a question for me, since that's something that's very specific to what Jewish Federation of Silicon Valley used to do, was had this publication that came out on a regular basis. And so what I can tell you is we are trying to find new and creative ways to address that need. And so just be on the lookout for more. We've been a little caught up with the pandemic. And so we've been dealing with lots of priorities, but this is not to say that this is not one of those priorities, but it is something that we're trying to address in new ways so that we can actually reach even more people than we would with just a publication. But anyway, more to come on that. So I just want you to know that this is a concern that has been raised over and over and over again. And we are working on it. So
okay, so
yeah,
of course, kind of creating this kind of public sphere, the place where people come to stay informed, and in a very fragmented, right, environment, I think is usually important. Shayna, do you want to open your mic to ask a question or a comment? So I mean, I don't want to introduce you. Maybe you can just say a sentence of introducing yourself for those who don't know you.
Okay.
Yes, we hear you.
Hi, everyone. Shayna Pan, and I direct Toby Philanthropies. And in that role, I have the privilege to work with all of the JCCs in the Bay Area. And I'm just getting to know Scott, which is great. And and each JCC, I think, has very distinctive communities that your programs serve and reflect, and also certain strategies and infrastructure that, of course, is very common. And when we talk about preschool is so important because this is where young people kids get Jewishness and Judaism into their bones, it becomes a part of their DNA growing up. But it's not just what I learned from the JCCs is that there's a strategy here. The kids bring Judaism home, and it's the parents that are just as important as the kids. That families are it's the heart of every JCC is the family unit, and I love to watch how JCCs cultivate lay leadership in their parents. And the parents of the kids who go to the preschools and eventually their after schools and so forth. And so remember, we're also educating the parents, and that's extremely important. And I just say bravo to you for the ways that you all do that.
Right. I just have to say, Shayna, in this context, that in the early days of Israel, the idea was to teach Hebrew to the kids in order for them to bring Hebrew home to their parents who were newcomers, and right. So and it was a very intentional idea of, don't teach the parents, teach the kids. Right. They will teach their parents. So I think it kind of somehow reminding that, right?
Well, we're all immigrants in that way. I mean, and then in Poland, where Jews have been so assimilated, in the process of de-assimilation, again, it's the preschools and the kindergartens where the kids are bringing challahs home on Fridays and saying, we have to have Shabbat.
Yeah. We're gonna try and wrap up, unless anyone has and I'm sorry if I neglected anyone. I'm just trying to kind of follow, the chat and kind of see if anybody's raising their hands. So anyone, if you want to add anything, or like things that have not been said, but thank you so much for giving the time on a winter Sunday, chilly Sunday afternoon. It's been a great pleasure having all of you here, and all of you speakers, Lael, Zack, Melissa, Scott. Thank you for the work that you're doing and for coping, with so many challenges these days. And the pandemic will be over at some point. It will be over and we'll all get together, so stay tuned. Right?
Thank you so
Anat,
much,
thank you.
Anat, and
Thank you so much.
Thank you to my colleagues for joining us today. I really appreciate it, and thank you to everybody who attended, and of course thank you to Maya for organizing this, and all of Jubilee. So
Yeah, I wanted to add, if I could have almost the second or third to last word, is that if welcoming, I'm new to the community, and I've been welcomed so much, not only by my own community, but by my colleague of peers, 3 of which are on the screen today. And if this welcomeness is indicative of our Jewish community here in the Bay Area, then everything is going to be okay, because this is just a warm and welcoming and opening place for anybody. And so thank you for letting me participate today, and thank you all.
Yeah, I'll finish with words in Hebrew. Yeh tov. We say it a lot. Yeh beseder. And thank you and shalom. We'll finish the Zoom. Thank you, Gabe, for your support in this event.
bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you all for joining us. Thanks, Lael. Thanks, Anat. Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye.